the January meeting of the Prince William Sound Audubon Society. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marianne Bishop, President and also one of the founding members of our Prince William Sound Audubon chapter. We've been a chapter for over 20 years now. From September to April, we meet once a month, usually at the Forest Service courtroom, in conjunction with the Prince William Sound and Sea Grant Tuesday night lecture series. Tonight we're pleased to show on the big screen photos of bears taken by Cordova's premier wildlife photographer, Prince William Sound Audubon's vice president, and the chair of the state Audubon Alaska chapter organization that oversees all the chapters, Milo Burcham. So, it's got a lot of time here. Before I turn it over to Milo, I just want to mention a couple of things. Next month's Audubon meeting will be back over at the Forest Service on the 3rd floor, and it will be Kate McLaughlin, who's here tonight. She'll be talking about hummingbirds, her long-term project that she's had. Very, very interesting. Next week's Prince William Sound Science Series presentations by Sharon Wild. She's with ADF&G, if I remember correctly. And it's about herring genetics. And that will be, instead of on Tuesday night, it'll be on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock over at the Forest Service. The other thing I did want to mention is up here, if you're not on the mailing list, the email list, to get notices of the weekly meetings, you can sign up here on this clipboard. If you're interested in joining the Prince William Sound Audubon chapter, I have flyers there, and I also brought some flyers about cats and how dangerous they are to our birds. So if you have a cat, you might be interested in looking at that too. So we'll skip some of our normal monthly meeting and just go directly now to our speaker, Milo.
Oh yeah, the mirrors are dying. Marianne wanted me to mention something about the mirror die-off. Can you all hear me, or is it too loud? Sound okay? Okay. The mirrors are having a hard time this winter. They're having one of their periodic die-offs, and it might be bigger than the ones that have been seen in the past. And Marianne is asking that people with reports of them report to the Science Center. Or the Facebook page, Cordova Bird Alert. There's another place where you can put them. But anyway, bring them to the Science Center's attention. And for the most part, it's been happening all over the Gulf of Alaska and down the west coast of the United States. But we haven't seen that much of it in the eastern Prince William Sound. They've seen a lot over by Whittier, and you just mentioned they're seeing some in Constantine Harbor on Hitchinbrook now. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Let me hit this light. And I'm excited about this because we have this fantastic new facility here that we're only just now starting to use, and an incredible projection system, and that's why I wanted to have my presentation here, because I think that we're kind of coming out of the dark ages of slideshows or visual presentations, because I think projected slides looked good on big screens back in the day, but it's been a while since we've seen an actual slideshow. But the digital projectors that we've been using for the past 10 or 15 years have not been that great. If you're picky about how your pictures look, there's these weird color shifts and all kinds of overly bright or dark or things like that. And anyway, I was expecting it or hoping that images would look great here. And when I tested them here this afternoon, I was blown away. They look fantastic. And just last week, I was invited to be the speaker for Alaska Society of Nature Photographers in Anchorage. And they had a similar system. And I says, holy cow, this is how our pictures are supposed to look again. And anyway, it's exciting to get to show pictures off like this. And I think it's kind of just testing the ground how we can use the new Cordova Center and work out. Jason Jason Gabrielson is in the back. He's an employee of the library, and he has to stay after hours to help us project this as the technician. And hopefully we can work out a way that it's easier and affordable for us to use this venue. But anyway, it's beautiful, and thanks for everybody for coming. Now, I'm here to talk about, at least as it was advertised, 2 trips I took, and one of them with my wife Paula, to see bears this summer. One to the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary, which is on the Alaska Peninsula, and the other one to Kaktovik to see polar bears. That's where I got the title from living color to black and white. But also, in the process, I'm going to talk about bear viewing in general and the opportunities that we have around the state. And basically, what it takes to find places and get to see bears up close and personal. First of all, I wanted to start out by saying we have a really interesting relationship with bears. On one hand, we think of them as these cute, cuddly little things, and on the other hand, we're terrified by them. We're scared to death of them. And then on one hand, we like to hunt them, and we also vilify them as an animal that competes with us for food. They like to eat caribou and moose calves. But also, we're dying to see them. And probably the number one thing that anybody who visits Alaska wants to see is a bear in the wild. In fact, probably most of us that live in Alaska value the opportunities to see bears and go out of our way to see them at one time or another. And everybody's comfort level is a little bit different. Some people are happy to see them far away at a distance like this. And there's others that want to see them up close and personal. Anyway, this map kind of paints the story of kind of our relationship with bears and why so many people in the country want to see bears. If you look at this map, the sagebrush color that covers most of the lower 48 states, that's the former range of brown bears in the United States. They're extinct in those places now. They don't occur there anymore. They have black bears throughout most of the United States. But anyway, grizzly bears, which is the same thing as brown bears, have been extirpated from most of the lower 48, with the exception of an area around Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming and the northern Rocky Mountains in Montana. But if you look further north, you see there's still a lot of brown bears in North America, but they're just mostly in Alaska and British Columbia and Yukon and the Northern Territories. But Alaska has it pretty good, at least depending on your point of view, when it comes to seeing bears. We have a lot of them. In fact, some areas in Alaska have really high densities. In fact, we live side by side with bears. We really can't go anywhere outside of wintertime without being close to bears. We don't see them all the time, but they're there, and we usually see signs of them. And because of that, you might think that, we live in bear country, it should be easy to see bears, and it should be easy to get pictures of bears. But actually, that's not the case. In most of the state, bears are hunted, they're wary, and they're actually really hard to see, or we're a little bit afraid of them, or to get close, to look for them and get close to them. But over the past, it's almost 15 years now that Paula and I have lived in Cordova. Over the past 14 years anyway, I've invested hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours looking for opportunities to photograph bears in a safe way that's minimally disturbing to the bears and also relatively safe for me and the people that I bring. And I've had some success with that, but it comes as a result of lots of time invested in it. And these are some pictures that I've taken here on the Copper River Delta or Prince William Sound that are a result of those hundreds and hundreds of hours of trying to do it. And it's exciting. I love looking for bears and bringing people to see bears. And some of the results have been amazing. But even though I like those last 4 pictures I showed you, my typical interaction with bears might be characterized pretty quickly by these types of pictures. And what you're seeing here are really alert bears, sometimes fairly tolerant, but not all the time behaving normally. Like occasionally, as I showed you pictures of, I've seen them fishing, and I've seen them walking by and feeding and things like that, but I don't get to see them sleeping. I don't get to see them nursing their cubs. I don't have them come up and lay down from me to Sierra away. Anyway, like I said, I've had to work really hard at what I've got, but I've also got a lot of really alert looks, and to a point that's neat, but it's also not the complete picture of bear biology, and as a result, sometimes this is what I see, bears running away. After all the time I've invested to get to a place to see bears, sometimes I just get to see their hind end running into the bushes. And it also comes at some level of risk, and I do everything I can to minimize that, but bears that are not accustomed to seeing people can react unpredictably at times. And I just wanted to put this slide up because seconds after this female bear saw me and stood up like this, she charged. And it was one of the scarier things I've ever encountered in my life. And it's actually happened to me 3 times since I've lived here, twice while carrying a camera. And it's intimidating, and it's a reminder that we're not in control of these places. And so anyway, there's some element of risk by just going out and trying to find a bear. Also, it's not always the best for bears, and some what we call photo opportunities aren't very good things for the bears themselves. And the next couple of pictures are of a bear on the Russian River on the Kenai Peninsula. The Russian River is a place right off the Kenai River itself where thousands and thousands of fishermen come every summer. And they've gotten the habit of filleting their salmon and throwing the carcasses in the shallow stream. And what happens? Bears have come to realize that it's easy food. And to get that food, they've had to overcome their fear of humans and become what we would try to consider tame. But by overcoming that fear, they also can create problems. Although they might not bother the people on the stream so much, when they're not at the stream itself, they might be going to a lodge and getting into the dumpster or scaring somebody at night. And a sad truth about this bear is that it was limping because it had been shot before. In fact, its mother had been killed by a fisherman that surprised its mother on the trail. And this is the same bear. And the sad truth is this bear was killed later that fall because of its being around people that much and learning some bad habits of getting food from people. This bear ended up the loser. And you guys probably all know this picture because it was our phone book cover a few years back. But this is a similar story. Every once in a while, a bear along our road system out here on the Copper River Delta finds a food source and overcomes its fear of humans, even though it's a hunted population. A few bears will say, hey, this is looking okay. The humans aren't doing anything to me. There's a lot of fish right here. And I did get some neat pictures of this bear on a couple of occasions that summer. But on the opening day of hunting season, somebody shot it. So anyway, these situations aren't always the best for bears. And the same can be said for black bears. And I'm not going to talk as much about black bears tonight. But it's actually pretty hard in this state to find a place where it's easy to see black bears. A lot of the bear viewing opportunities that exist in Alaska are kind of centered around brown bears. But anyway, there are a few. And it's actually become more and more difficult to see one in Prince William Sound because of conservation concerns. Their numbers, they're not doing as well in Prince William Sound. And I've spent a fair amount of time traveling to the western Prince William Sound to photograph bears in the past. In the last few years, they've been increasingly hard to find, so those opportunities have been more difficult. So I want to present to you what makes a good bear viewing opportunity and kind of point out some of the opportunities that exist in the state. And really, as big as Alaska is, there's not that many places where it's easy and safe and places that are managed real well to see bears. But I'm going to kind of summarize, and this isn't an exhaustive list. There's varying degrees of being able to see bears in various places. But these are the places that are managed specifically for it, and that means people management much more than it does bear management. But the Tongass National Forest has 3 such places, and they're Pat Creek, which is on Admiralty Island near Juneau, Ann Creek, which is near Wrangell, and Fish Creek, which my wife and I went to in 1999 on our honeymoon, which is near Hyder, Alaska. And those are 3 places managed by the Tongass National Forest for viewing bears. In fact, these 2 represent really the only or the best opportunities to see black bears in the state. Those 2 places have both black bears and brown bears. But Pat Creek has just brown bears, and the other spots have just brown bears or polar bears, like I'll mention in a second. And then probably the most famous situations for viewing bears in Alaska are these that occur on the Alaska Peninsula. And they include 2 parks, 2 national parks, Lake Clark and Katmai National Parks. And they're the top and bottom dots of those 3. And then the center one, which is one of the ones that I'll go into detail tonight, that my wife and I visited this summer, the McNeil River State Game Sanctuary. And they're amazing, especially the 2 national parks are huge tracts of land that are closed to hunting, so the bears can get over their fear of humans and not pay for it later, like the bear on a road system maybe. And what people do is tightly managed, and as I'll point out here, that's the key to being able to enjoy bears in a safe way, is what people do has to be managed really, really carefully. And then the other 2 places in the state are Denali National Park, and then the one for polar bears, Kaktovik, which is part of within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up on the very north coast of Alaska. And although I'm not going to spend that much time on it, because it's the most accessible to the most people, I was going to just say a little bit about Denali National Park. Denali National Park is on the road system. Probably most of us in this room have been there. And it's a great place to see bears, and it's probably where the most people that come to Alaska get to see bears. It's tight. The people are tightly managed. You can't just drive your vehicle in the park like you can on most national parks. After the first 15 miles of road in the park, you have to jump in a bus, and they strictly control. They'll let you off. You can go hiking or get dropped off at campgrounds and stuff like that. But anyway, the access and what you can do is pretty strictly regulated. So anyway, that's the main way people get to see Denali National Park, is from these buses. Like I say, the people are carefully managed. There's a couple exceptions to that. One is you can drive your personal car on the first 15 miles of road, and that's oftentimes a good place to see bears. My wife and I on the honeymoon got to photograph a grizzly bear right near the road. But there's another way to see bears, or to see the park and also get to see bears that maybe a few people in this room have done, and that's called the Road Lottery. Have some of you heard about that? At the middle or 3rd week of September, when the main visitor season of the park has taken place, they open up the park to those who have been drawn in a special lottery. And I think it's 700 vehicles a day are allowed in the park, which is a huge contrast to the very fixed number of buses that are allowed in the park each day during the main season. But with that road lottery, for one day, if you get drawn, you can take your personal car into the park and see caribou and moose and have a chance of seeing a wolf or a lynx. And it's a fantastic opportunity. And anyway, I encourage you to go to the Denali Park website and look for it. I didn't put a link up, but that's a great way to see the park. There's one other way. Professional photographers that meet these special criteria and definition can get a pro pass to take their personal vehicle in the park. And although I've never drawn one of those, some of my friends that are professional photographers have, and I've rode along with them. And that's been a fantastic photo opportunity. And I just wanted to illustrate some of the ways you can see bears in Denali Park. There's an incredible, really wild landscape. And this is why I wanted to show my pictures here tonight. This projector is incredible. Every little detail can be seen, and anyway, it's pretty exciting. And to get a picture like this, you don't just walk up to a bear, even in a place like Denali National Park. I was inside a car, sticking my lens through the window when a bear did walk really close to our car. But anyway, it's pretty exciting. So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about 2 bear viewing trips that I took to some of these, premier destinations in Alaska. And the first one was with my wife Paula. And this is also a lottery, and I'll encourage everybody in this room to go to the State Alaska Department of Fish and Game website and look for the McNeil River. And the permits or the applications for the drawing, I think, are due sometime in March, and they draw shortly afterwards. And from around mid-June to 3rd week in August, there are 4 consecutive 4-day windows, and they draw 10 people to visit throughout that whole period. And it is one of the premier wildlife viewing situations that exist in this country because of the very small number of people that are allowed, and how strictly, and this is where it's located on the Alaska Peninsula, and because of how strictly the humans are regulated, it's incredible. And I think that place has been in business for over 30 years, or close to 30 years, and there has not been one incident where a human or a bear has been harmed. It's that carefully managed. And the humans are strictly regulated, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but the bears know what to expect from people. And so there's some really predictable behavior going on both sides. To get there, well, first of all, you have to get drawn. And this year was the first year my wife and I put in, and as luck would have it, we got drawn. It's not that easy, especially in the middle of the season. When in the middle of the season, like middle of July, is when you have lots of bears at McNeil Falls, and that's a much harder time period to get. But on the shoulder seasons, and we were there at the second to last 4-day slot, it's apparently easier, and one of the slots that I chose was one of those shoulder seasons, and I think that's why we got our permit. Anyway, you fly in, I'll back up a second. So if you get drawn, then you got to find your way to Homer, and at Homer you have to talk to some of the bush pilots there. I think this was Beluga Air, and arrange a bush flight, a float plane that will take you across Cook Inlet. It's about 100 miles, and this is the biggest cost of the whole thing. The permit cost isn't all that great, but you do have to pay for this bush flight, and fly you 100 miles across to the Alaska Peninsula and get dropped off at the McNeil camp. And you'll be met by the guides. This opportunity comes with state-hired guides. 2 of them are in this picture right here, but you can see the camp at the left side of the screen there. There's some quarters that the guides live in, a cabin that's for the visitors, not for sleeping, it's just for cooking and storing food, and you're camping in tents. And this is a picture of the cook and the cooking quarters and the food storage area right here. There's a little elevated platform. And these are our 3 guides while I was there. The main guy, Tom Griffin, he hurt his back and wasn't able to be there for the time. He's a friend of mine. But anyway, he wasn't able to be there. But in the center is a Fish and Game employee, Tony Carnahan. And then on the right, with the red beard, is Drew Hamilton. And then Ray, and I'm forgetting his last name. Anyway, these are the 3 guides that we have right here, and all of them have tons of experience being around bears and know exactly, Tony in particular, have a lot of experience working at McNeil. They know the bears by name, literally by name, and have really strict rules on how we're supposed to behave, and that was emphasized over and over again. This is the group that we were put with. Up to 10 people could be there at a time, but because of some stormy weather, some people didn't make it, so we had a little bit smaller group. On the left, we had a guy from Juneau, then we had 2 gals from Fairbanks, and then mixed on the far right there, the 2 are a couple from South Carolina. And then Paula and I, and then some of the guys are in the picture there. And anyway, you get to make some good friends and meet some new people as a result. It rained when we got there. It was sprinkling, actually. And the rest of the weather for the 4 days was just spectacular. This is the first morning. Here's a bald eagle flying over, and the view of the McNeil Lagoon to the left, and then the bay of Cook Inlet to the right there. And this is the campground. You're camping in pre-established campsites, and like I say, the rules are strict. There is no food in your tent. You're not allowed to walk to the beach unless you get one of the guides or tell somebody what you're doing. All of your cooking and everything takes place in the cabin. And yes, bears do come through here every once in a while, but we were told that if a bear shows up in camp, you are not taking pictures of it. You tell the guides, and they get hazed out of there real fast. They taught the bears not to hang out around camp. They're laying some groundwork. In fact, one morning, around 4 in the morning or something, I did hear something, and sure enough, a female and a cub were kind of hustling out of, from somewhere around the campsite. And then, like I say, the humans are strictly regulated. You can't go to the beach without telling a guide or being with the guide. You can't walk anywhere outside of the camping area. And then once you go out to view bears, you're with your guide and your group. You have to tell them or ask them that when you need to go to the bathroom. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is there's times when you're generally approaching a bear that you don't want to scare it off and you want to look as small as possible, and they have you all get single file, so you're presenting to the bear a really small silhouette. And then other times you'll spread out and sit down, sometimes distant from the bear, and let the bear come to you. And you're supposed to talk softly and not raise your voice. And if the bear comes really close and you need something in your pack a few feet away, you have to forget about it and let the bear just walk by. Because they want the bears to learn that there's nothing to be afraid of. But also there's no reason to be attracted to humans, because the presence of food in your group is just really, really strictly regulated. And here we are, all lined up on a gravel bar. You can see the camp on the far left, and you can see a bear. This is a female called Lax, and she has 2 cubs. And it's where we spent most of our time, is watching this bear Lax. And although in this picture she's a few hundred yards away, sometimes she was 10 yards away. Anyway, the place was fantastic, and I came home, maybe my most overpowering feeling about this whole place was I'm so glad there's places like this on this earth. The first morning, this bear walked the beach right in front of camp with these spectacular mountains, beautiful light. It was something else. And then right away, so the first day, we go out in the field to photograph bears, and the very first bear was this one. It really didn't have a name. They didn't have a good name for it. Do you remember, Paula, what they called this one?
No, I don't. I was looking for her. I don't know, but it was a female, but they didn't have a name.
It was a younger female, and I think it wasn't bipolar, but anyway, it was kind of a new up-and-coming bear that was just kind of learning the ropes around there. And anyway, we sat on the bank of the river. It was on a little gravel bar island right there. And right away, I recognized the difference between what I was getting to watch and photograph here and everything I'd seen in the last 14 years of trying to photograph bears in Prince William Sound. And one of them was, this one didn't care. And that was beautiful. It really was. You saw the series of pictures of alert bears standing up and looking at me. I never get to see this. In hunted populations, this would be a rare way to observe a bear. And it was awesome. And I can be very patient with my wildlife photography. I know Rhea won't repeat my rule of photography, but it's cool what happens if you stick around. Cool things happen if you stick around. And it's true, even though this bear looks pretty boring, sleeping, if you're willing to spend a few hours watching a bear sleep, it's pretty cool. And no animal really is completely inanimate, over a period of hours. I know that if you see a sleeping animal like a sea otter or something, if you sit and watch it for a while, cool things happen. And these are some of my favorite pictures. Anyway, right away, we got to find this bear. We sat down next to it and had amazing photo opportunities. And then we saw Lax and her 2 cubs a few hundred yards ahead of us. And a lot of the group was kind of antsy and wanted to go see this female with her cubs. And I was dying because I did not want to leave this bear. And these are some of my favorite photographs of the trip, even though I got many others of the females and cubs and everything else. But anyway, I thought it was awesome, and it was illustrated right away how different this is than where you get to see bears, you know, in other places where they're not protected and where people aren't managed like this. Anyway, we did head over to Lax and her cubs and got to see them, and we spent hours, you know, over 4 days watching this female and her cubs. And there was a small, the male cub was a little bit smaller than the female cub, and he was a troublemaker. He would cry to mom all the time. He would be growling when he was eating a piece of fish if the sibling came to try to take a piece of it. But anyway, they were cute as all get out. And again, this is something I haven't got to see in 14 years of photographing, you know, wild bears in Prince William Sound or on the road system here, is close-ups of cubs. This would be a much more dangerous situation in places where bears aren't as accustomed to seeing people. And this is Lax, the female right there. And then later that same day, this series of events happened. And again, it's one of the neatest photo opportunities in my photo career, or just neatest opportunities viewing wildlife. So we found Lax a little bit later in the day. She was sleeping on this little grassy bench, and her cubs, one of her cubs is in the picture right there. And for some reason, she was really hot. Her belly, these bears were obese, but they're supposed to be obese. I'm going to contrast that with polar bears a little bit later. Salmon have been in the river all summer long. They've had everything they wanted to eat. Most of them have left the river, but a few, like Lax, are still feeding on salmon, and their bellies are almost dragging the ground. And I think their bellies are almost composting and warming them up, because this bear was heaving. It was breathing so hard because it was hot. And after a few minutes, you could tell she was uncomfortable, panting, and her sides just heaving, trying to sleep. And what she did next is just go lay in the river. She just plopped herself down in the river, lay with her nose flat in the river, and was cooling off. And it was pretty funny to watch. In fact, she stayed there for an hour or more, and the only reason she finally moved is because the tide started coming up and covering her head. One of the cubs, this is the little male, the little troublemaker, came up and tried to lay on her and stay dry. But then a neat series of events unfolded, and the female cub had laid down on the bank by itself and was kind of resting herself. And again, just priceless photo opportunity, and these are not the kind of pictures I've been able to take of bears, over 14 years of living here. And then the little troublemaker male comes over, leaves the female laying in the river, and then came over and joined the female cub. And I gotta watch them wrestle like this. Anyway, it was just awesome watching these things, wrestle and play for 5 minutes or so. And then the little male cub got bored and walked up to that same grassy bench that they'd been sleeping on earlier. And this is one of those examples that I said, I used the same phrase in Anchorage last week, I just can't make this shit up. You couldn't have choreographed this or asked for this, but the little cub picks up a bald eagle feather and for about 4 minutes starts playing with it. And I am blazing away with my camera. And just dumbfounded as I'm watching this. I mean, it's the cutest thing that I could ever imagine. And we played around with this a little bit earlier. This is a little video clip. It takes a little while for it to load, so I'm going to talk just for a second while it's loading, and I hope it works right. Anyway, in 4 minutes, while that bear cub was playing with that feather, I took 161 pictures. And I showed you, I deleted most of them, or basically deleted them from my main cataloging system, but I did save them in a separate folder and ran them together in a little video or time lapse. And this is what's going to take a second. It will eventually work, but bear with me. Oh, no pun intended. There we go. This is 161 pictures over 4 minutes run together as a little time lapse. Anyway, the thing picked up the feather, fell over backwards, but they picked it up again, and those minutes watching that bear were something else. It made a cool little time lapse. This is a picture of the landscape. Now this is the premier attraction of McNeil River, is the McNeil River Falls. And in peak season, there's 40 or 50, up to 50 bears fishing at this spot. When we got there, there was one. Like I said, we were on the shoulder season, and it doesn't show in this picture, but a big adult male named Braveheart was still fishing there, but all the other bears had left, probably feeding on berries in the tundra or other foods like that. But still, we had a great opportunity, getting to see this male, Braveheart, pretty large male, although they say he's in his teens. He's kind of an up-and-comer. But he was still fishing. We watched him catch many fish. Here he is here. And big adult male bears usually show battle scars. And you can see his lip is sagging a little bit. And was it Ted Light that had the scar on the nose?
Ted Light has the scar on the
Yeah, I'll show you that in a second. Anyway, these are pictures of Braveheart fishing at the falls. Just a month earlier, that he would have been competing with 40 other bears here. But it was not disappointing in the least seeing only one, or seeing, or not seeing bears at the falls, because our opportunities to view bears up close were still just incredible. Here he is diving into the pool. One of his methods of fishing is just to sit in the roaring white water of the river and make an eddy, and then just catching the fish that would pool up in the little eddy that he created. And this is our Christmas card this year, me and Paula and Ted Light. Or I'm sorry, Braveheart. This is Ted Light. So this is another giant male, and this is another example of why this place is special. Because in most of Alaska, I'll bet brown bears don't get to be 28 years old. Through hunting, they're probably culled out of the population oftentimes, and then when they're old and geriatric, they don't compete very well, or they just get seen and taken out of the population. This guy was, they estimate, this adult male was estimated at 28 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood, and its legs and joints were so stiff it could barely walk. It was obese from feeding on salmon all summer long, and it walked out of the woods or out of the brush in slow motion until it got into the river, and then it was fine. It was buoyant in the water and stayed in the water for hours. And this is the one that has the neat scar on its nose. By the way, Paul is working on a neat series of paintings from some of these individuals that we got to know over just those 4 days. And then this is Lax coming back downriver with her cubs. And this is our closest bear encounter of the trip. She and her 2 cubs walked within about 10 yards of us, close to sunset. This is the group watching her go by here. There's a nice picture of her in the beautiful evening light. This is another. This is actually the same one that was sleeping on the gravel bar, looking at its shadow. There's that cute cub. And on this particular evening, we saw the opportunity of, our guide, Drew, said, if they go to this certain place, you'll be able to take a picture of the bear with the St. Augustine volcano in the background. And we waited and waited and waited. It was getting dark, and you don't want to walk very far in the dark with this many bears around. So we were having to put our stuff together and get ready to walk the mile back to camp. And all of a sudden, it lined up. In fact, we put all our gear away, and we were crossing a stream in waders. And then we looked up, and we saw Lax with Augustine volcano and pink sky in the distance. And anyway, we all pulled our cameras out and took pictures midstream right there as we were leaving for the evening. And this is Braveheart shaking water. This is the same bear that was sleeping on our first day. We got him sleeping on a sandbar later in the trip. And there he is, or she is, sleeping with Augustine volcano in the background. There's Lax with camp in the background. Lax's 2 cubs. Anyway, it was a first-class experience, and I recommend people putting in, although it's going to hurt Paula's and my odds if you guys put in when we apply next year. It's worth putting in and make your plans around it if you get drawn. It's a world-class experience. This is us waiting to get picked up on the last day. There's the float plane coming for us. It was quite the storm coming in. We just got out just before it hit. And we were basically had no precip the whole time we were there. So I'm going to contrast that with another trip I took this year to see bears, and this time polar bears. You know, they were a bucket list, or they are a bucket list thing for me. As a real avid wildlife photographer, I guess someday I'd like to do a book about Alaska wildlife. And you can't do a book on Alaska wildlife if you don't have polar bear pictures. So they were high on my list, but it was intimidating because of the logistics for getting up to Kaktovik, the only place in Alaska where you can really view polar bears, and expensive. I won't lie to you, this trip was not cheap. Anyway, I fell into this. There's a guy who organizes a group up there just about every year, and they had a cancellation about a month before they were heading up, and I got an email asking if I was interested, or the first person to respond would get that slot, and I'd already passed on that. But another friend of mine was in this group, and I says, oh, what the heck, you can't put these things off forever. And so I jumped, and we went on this trip at the very end of September, the very last few days of September and first couple days of October. To get there, you got to fly through Dead Horse, so you fly commercial up to Dead Horse, which is the oil capital of Alaska. It's the very northern end of the Dalton Highway, the ice road that the truckers take. And it is where the center of oil development in the Arctic. This is some of the development. You can see it sprawling. It's a sprawling hub, and you can look over the distance as you fly in and see all the oil derricks and the infrastructure for oil. And it's an industrial town. People don't walk the roads very much, but we did. And in fact, we got stuck there. And this is illustrates part of the expense of going up here. I paid everything in full, my hotel for Kaktovik and my guided trips and boats to go out to see bears. It's all expensive and completely unrefundable. And when we got to Dead Horse and the fog set in and we couldn't fly out, so I lost my first day in Kaktovik, one night of the very expensive hotel, and my first two paid-for outings to see bears. I was kind of sick about it, thinking about what little opportunity. We were only going to be there 4 times, and we're going to only have 5 outings total to see bears. So anyway, I lost just that one night of lodging, and my first 2 out of my total of 5 trips to go see field visits to go see the bears out in boats. But anyway, we made the best out of it. We also had to pay for a hotel in Dead Horse. It was a little less expensive than the one in Kaktovik, but we walked the roads, and I was able to photograph ptarmigan right along the road system in Dead Horse. But the next day, the fog lifted just enough, and we did make it to Kaktovik. And you start forgetting all these pains of your cancellation and how much it costs once you get there. It's a native village on the top of the world. There it is. It's on the northern tip of North America, and it's within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But before going up there, I wanted pictures of polar bears real badly, but I had a few fears about what I might get or what I might see. I've seen lots of photographs that other photographers have got from Kaktovik. And 2 of my greatest fears would be that we wouldn't have snow and that the bears would be filthy. And this picture illustrates both. I could hardly point my camera at this picture, at this bear, and take a picture. Because this is not what we envision when we think of polar bears. Anyway, I was scared to death that I'd spend all that money and go all that trouble and get these pictures of ugly bears. And I was actually stressing out about it a little bit. But we got there, and things were looking halfway decent. They got a little bit of snow. This is the airport. And this is us unloading on the airstrip. There were polar bear tracks right on the airstrip. As we were taxiing, I could look out the window and see polar bear tracks. And this is where we stayed. So first thing we did is we went to the Waldo Arms Hotel. This place costs $288 a night. Non-refundable. It was something else. But you know, what are you going to do? At this point, you're just going with the flow. You came here for a certain reason, and you can start to remember what you're there for pretty quick. You know you're not in any place you're in a place that's not like any place you've ever been in your life. It's a really remote subsistence, village on the north slope. This is the Brooks Range, about 40 miles away. This is what the town looks like. It's sparse and it's in a super harsh environment. These are sled dogs that were in a pen here. And you don't have to walk around the town very long before you realize you're in a true subsistence community where people make their livings off the land. The Inuit live and make their livings off of what they can harvest. And they're pretty well known for being a village that still harvests whales, bowhead whales. And we saw the evidence of that. This was something they called a skink whale, a whale that was struck, and yet it sank. And they couldn't retrieve it because it laid on the bottom. And I guess only after a couple of days it'll float back to the surface. But the meat is tainted at that point, and they can only eat the blubber. They don't eat the flesh. And that because of that, and another whale that had an old strike, it had an old harpoon head in it from a hit from years ago. It was deemed not. Well, it was questionable how edible it was. I think because of that, bears had a lot more to eat than they normally do from the remains of harvested whales, and that'll play into some of this that I'll tell you about in a minute. But anyway, it's pretty amazing that there's villages that still harvest whales to eat. And walking around town, here's whale bones, laying in the street or in people's yards. And here's whale blubber, meat, laying in people's yards on tarps and covered with snow. And I got a couple different stories. Some said that they were waiting to find out if that one whale was safe to eat, and others say that this is just where they store it before they cut it up and put it away. But it's below freezing. There's nothing happening to it. But anyway, there'd be whale meat laying in people's yards like this. But this is the significance of the place for polar bears, is what they call the bone pile. After they've harvested whales and taken all the meat off, and I think there was more leftover meat this year for those reasons I just described, they take the remains and put them in the bone pile. And this is where polar bears come to feed at night. And it's also why polar bears are pretty dirty. It's because they're walking around all these greasy bones of whales. Marine mammals are incredibly greasy, and then they get the grease all over them, and then they roll in the dirt, and they become very dirty. That was one of the things I was afraid of. And in a changing environment, a changing world, the significance of that bone pile to bears has increased by a lot. In the past, this is the average retreat of the ice edge is to this point right here, and that usually happens in August or probably in September. And then the ice starts coming back. But a lot of the summer, the sea ice is still not very far off the coast. And by August or September, it might retreat to this point, but then it starts coming right back. Not that big of a gap for bears, although that's still several hundred miles, and not for very long. And polar bears make their living on sea ice. In 2012, this is the greatest retreat. We're breaking records every few years. This is the maximum retreat in mid-September of the sea ice. And this is how far from the Alaska shore it retreated. And that's probably 500 or 600 miles. And polar bears have actually been documented swimming 400 miles through the Arctic Ocean to get to shore, which is just incredible. They might be swimming 2 or 3 miles an hour. Imagine how long that takes in the cold water. Anyway, this is the trouble that polar bears are in. And this is why the bone piles in these communities that still harvest whales are really important to polar bears, is they're an alternative food source. Bears make their living hunting on pack ice, hunting seals. And when that pack ice recedes so far from shore and their hunting opportunities are reduced, they typically have to wait for that ice to come back before they can hunt again. And the plight of polar bears is that they're in worse and worse condition because that season when they can't hunt becomes greater and greater. But there's a small group of bears, relatively small percentage of the population, that has come to rely on those bone piles for food. And we got to see a few bears. There's a female, she had 2 cubs feeding on the scraps at the bone pile, just gulls flying everywhere. And this is what we did to photograph bears. We jumped in boats with a native guide, and we would go out for 4 hours at a time. And the guy who organized the trip had worked out a rotation where we were going to get X number of trips. So I already told you, I missed 2 of my 5 trips on the first day. This is the boat that we went in the first afternoon. So soon after we landed, got all our stuff put away in the hotel, we went down and met our boat captain and went out to photograph polar bears, which was pretty exciting. And again, you start forgetting all the money you spent. This is one of the guides, and I went on 3 different boats with 3 different native guides. And this guy was by far my favorite and the best of them that I got to know. His name was Bruce Inglengassack, if I'm pronouncing it anywhere close to it correctly. And it was a really funny story. If any of you have seen online pictures of a guy being chased around a truck by a polar bear, well, this is the guy that it happened to. He was guiding somebody. They were watching polar bears from the road or from their vehicles, and one of the female of one of the cubs was walking away, and he was wondering where the other cub was, and the photographer was asking if he could get out and photograph. He goes, well, I better check and see where that other cub is. And he got out of the truck, and he was showing me these pictures on his cell phone of the bear chasing around his truck. He just barely made it and slammed the door of that vehicle. But anyway, it was just, he loved telling the story, and it was just hilarious, him holding up the pictures on his cell phone. And then this is some of the group I was with. Some of these are retired fish and game biologists. That's John Shane on the far left, and Ken Whitten, second from the left. And Jules Tileson is a photographer from Anchorage, kneeling down low there. And that's Bob Waldrop, who organized the trip, standing there. And this is another boat that I was on. I did make up for 2 of the days that I lost, also at great expense, but I was there. And these are some of the other boats. There was up to 7 or 8 boats at a time that would have groups like ours photographing bears at a time. This is our group in one of the boats. And this is basically how we were doing it. Either we would beach the boats on shore near bears, or just be just offshore of them like this, and photograph from the safety of a boat. And if they came too close, we would back the boats away from shoreline. The bears are very used to people. They are hunted somewhat by the natives, but not very much. There's very little fear that the bears have of people. But it's a very neutral relationship. They know they don't get food from people either. But it was spectacular getting to see a polar bear, is all I could say. And that's the Arctic Ocean in the background. The sea ice is 400 miles away, a long way. This is a time when they're usually just hanging out, waiting for the sea ice to come back. And it was one of those situations, even though it wasn't that cold, it was in the upper 20s or low 30s, but it was wear everything you got, because it was blowing on some of those days. And this is a picture I took of myself wearing everything I had, and after 4 hours or so, you were cold no matter what you wore. But it was all worth it. And yep, I saw some bears that were clean, and we got some snow on the ground, and I got to see, real polar bears, and that's where the fun really started. This is shortly after we got there. After we checked in the hotel, the first evening out, I got to see and photograph polar bears. And it was still challenging. Light was low, and we were in a boat. In fact, I'm going to show you a video at the end of this, of a short video clip. Shot at about this time here, where the wind was probably blowing 40 knots, and these bears aren't phased one single bit. Look at this bear, just stretching, rubbing its head, shaking, and the wind just whipping the snow off of it, checking his nails. And then got to see some neat things like two males get up and spar. They're much more social than brown bears. Males congregating together and no real negative interactions. This is just play. And they're just chilling, waiting for the ice to come back. We could see as many as 15 polar bears at one time, and like in one of the previous pictures, they're just white lumps. A lot of times they were sleeping. In fact, we spent hours just waiting for bears to wake up and do something. So even though I'm going to show you some neat pictures of polar bears, from those fleeting opportunities that I had out in the boats, a lot of it was spent just waiting, watching sleeping white lumps. But we did end up with some really neat opportunities to photograph bears. This one's feeding on a chunk of whale flesh. They apparently grabbed a piece of whale flesh from the bone pile and swam out to the barrier island with it. Same with this female and her two cubs. But then I encountered another problem. I told you I was stressing out about dirty bears and lack of snow. Well, I got past that. But I didn't expect that another problem of mine would be pictures of bears that were obese and don't represent the plight of bears in the world that are starving because the ice edge is retreating so far. And that was the case. And I don't know how this stacks up exactly this year versus other years. In fact, I talked to a photographer when I was in Anchorage last week who had been there just 2 weeks before me and remarked about how skinny the bears were because they hadn't harvested whales yet. The natives hadn't harvested their whales yet. And so this happened in a pretty short time. But these things were fat, and they hardly represent, that starving polar bear on an iceberg. I like my pictures to represent, the status of bears, for conservation purposes also. But it was just unbelievable how fat some of these bears were. And it might have been extra so this year because of those tainted whales that they harvested. They might have had more whale meat available. I'm not quite sure of that. But there were some more normal looking bears too, and there were plenty of opportunities to get pictures of beautiful polar bears. And like I was showing you, we got some snow. And even though some of these aren't snow white, I started calling them white enough to look like a polar bear instead of a brown bear. This one played incessantly with a piece of whale skin. But it was neat, and sometimes we would just follow them, parallel them as they walked the shoreline. This is on the barrier island, the Arctic Ocean. Beaufort Sea is just north of, just beyond the rise there. And sometimes they came really close. They were curious about us in the boat. This bear was about to offer a nice photo opportunity, but it had this piece of whale flesh right here. And it hardly looked up, and this was getting frustrating. It was a beautiful white bear. I wanted some of these clean white ones. And it had this piece of whale flesh, but it was so fascinated with it, it wouldn't look up. And we spent several hours with this bear, and there were occasional brief periods where I could get it without that piece of whale flesh. But a lot of times it had this big, ugly hunk of flesh, hanging out of its mouth, and it would whip it back and forth, it would throw it out in the water, it would go out and get it. And it hardly ever looked up for me to get pictures like this. After 2 hours of watching it play with this meat in the water, I got 1 or 2 or 3 frames, that are halfway decent of it, halfway clean like that. But it was also amazing to see him in the water, and literally, this water that's just above freezing, the lagoon is getting close to freezing, and they were out in it for hours and hours. And it's just hard to think of any animal being that well insulated, another mammal. But anyway, we saw them swimming on several occasions. And it's hard to imagine that 400-mile swim that some whales have made. Here he is, the same bear with that same piece of flesh. Dropped it ever so briefly. But then a female with 2 older cubs came over and chased him off it. And then the female laid down on the beach, and the 2 cubs joined the first bear that had the piece of meat and played with it in the water, all 3 of them, for another hour or 2. But these were some of the cleanest and prettiest of the bears that we saw on the trip, and I definitely came home happy, getting to see, what a polar bear should look like. And here's a couple of those bears playing in the water. So anyway, that's pretty much sums up what we saw on the very last outing, the very last afternoon that I got to go out in the boat. The sun came out. We hadn't had sunshine the whole time I was there, and got to find a barrier island that had several, probably a dozen, male bears. These were all mature males, it looked like, and got to see them in some pretty beautiful light. And these are among the last pictures that I took. And now we're going to have that same issue with this loading. And so, bear with me. This is terrible video. It's taken with my digital SLR and my big 600mm lens in a boat that was rocking in winds that were probably 40 knots. And you'll see evidence of it here in a second. And the sound is terrible. You know what wind sounds like when it rips over a mic? But there is sound, and I think we have it muted to the correct level. Unfazed they are in these hostile conditions where I can barely work my fingers. They're just laying, like it's nothing, waiting it out. There you go. Is that windy or what? Anyway, thanks for coming. That's what I have, and I thought that was a neat way to cap it off in just showing what polar bears live in. And that's probably actually nothing, compared to what they endure the rest of the winter. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, any questions?
So Milo,
Yeah.
you talked about being worried about not having snow. Is that, do you just have something against dirt? Does that to cover the dirt up, or?
Yeah, my vision of a polar bear picture is a white bear standing in snow or ice. And the viewing season for polar bears up here is September and the beginning of October. And a lot of that September window, especially in recent years, is snow-free. And that's why we scheduled our trip as late as we did, is the greater chance of having snow on the ground. And we lucked out. It was just, some of the first snows happened. But in previous days, the ground was bare, and yeah, it was pictures of polar bears on brown ground. And it just didn't meet, the pre-visualized picture of a polar bear that I was hoping to get.
Yeah, I guess something against dirt.
No, well, I did. I do with a polar bear picture.
Dirt on the bear, dirt on the ground.
Yeah. Pete?
You saw no hybrid between grizzly and polar bear?
They've occurred right here, in fact. And apparently, grizzlies will also occasionally come to the same bone pile when the polar bears are feeding at night. And they've got some neat videos of grizzly bears displacing the polar bears at the bone pile. Apparently, they're more dominant than the polar bears, even though they're much larger, to yield to the grizzlies. It's happened there. It's still a pretty rare occurrence, I think, the hybridization between the two. Yeah, Danny?
In talking to the biologists that you were with on this trip, did they have any more or better information on how the polar bears are doing along the coast? I would think that there's big areas of the coast where there aren't whales being harvested.
Well, we didn't really have a biologist with us, but I did have an opportunity later to talk to one of the lead polar bear biologists in the state. And I'm forgetting the numbers right here. I think she said the population, this particular population, is around 900 bears. There might be 30 or so that are using this bone pile. So the majority of them aren't benefiting like these are. So yeah, this is, an isolated case, these few bears that benefit. And there are a few other communities that harvest whales, Barrow and Point Lay, I don't know all the other ones. And apparently they don't have this concentration of polar bears. I'm not sure exactly why that is. But I think it's a relatively small number of bears that are benefiting. And still the plight of the polar bear is the same when you have sea ice leaving or receding that far. It's certainly bad for Alaska's polar bears. You see that the sea ice remains all around Greenland and some of the other parts of eastern Canada, but Alaska's polar bears are having a hard time because of it and have long swims and have to go longer and longer without feeding. Anyway, I encourage any of you to do it if you have the ability to do it or have the opportunity. It's fantastic. Even though it's in the same state where we live, it's a long way away. It seems like you're in another country. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, Milo. That's awesome.
Too low, too short.